Okay.
Is this thing on?
So how do I unlock the secret EEA
All right,
swag
we
line
are live.
again?
This is our burning question since we have James here is where do I get the EA merch? I need
Is
it.
there like premium membership and I unlock different tiers of swag? Or no?
Shoot me an email and say, hey, I want a shirt. How do I get a shirt? What I was saying is appreciate the comments and the request for the shirts. And like I said, it's definitely an ask and coming off of ETH Denver. We just have to figure it out. We as the EEA, you know, what are we doing? How are we doing it? So yeah, we definitely want to do that.
All right. Well, we are live. Thank you everyone for joining our March General Assembly, whether you're in the studio live with us here or watching from YouTube. I think we will also have some additional members hopping on shortly, but our agenda today will include going through some outreach updates, an ETH Denver recap, see what our research working group is up to, hear more about the completion of Milestone 3 for BRI-3, and then also some TSC updates, and then we'll have an open discussion. I know there's been lots of crazy, exciting, maybe not exciting, but crazy news in the tech business and other spaces. So we'll see if we can have some open discussions there. And with that, Mark Haddle, I'll hand over to you first, if you'd want to tell us what's going on in the outreach team.
Within the outreach team, well, we've been hard at work at setting up the RFP process that we're going to have for a roadshow series, and then also interoperability event. A lot of those probably might be combined because we want to tell everybody about, hey, this is what Baseline is, and let us show you about what it can do. And ideally, we want to have a live demo environment between two or more unrelated parties that basically will demonstrate the Baseline pattern in action. We have that going on. We also have another blog coming out, be published next week, I think the 21st. That we have. This is one that I did, and it's basically kind of a departure from the tech-heavy type content that we've been putting out. This is really kind of plain language, speaking to the non-technical, the business audience, to say this is what Baseline can do. This is what how it compares to other methods of integration, such as EDI bans, public and private blockchains, as well as some of the emerging offerings that are coming out. I don't know if anybody is, there's a company called Vendaya that's really kind of new on the scene, and they are, this was incubated by a couple of people from Amazon, and it's getting a lot more attention as far as how do you share data in environments to where the data that you have is sensitive and really has a lot of restriction on it. How can you still maintain your collaboration? So hopefully this blog will really kind of tear through a lot of the fog that's kind of persists a little bit when it comes to what does Baseline mean to the non-technical, to the business world. So that is what we got.
Awesome. And I think there's also some events in the queue for 2023. The next major set would be in Austin with ETH Austin and Consensus by CoinDesk. So hopefully we'll have some Baseline member representation there and have a heavy enterprise presence. And there are multiple calls to action for different papers or presentation slots for other events going on in the year. So for example, we have some Gartner conferences that need papers to be written for them. There's Lend It FinTech that has a speaker slot open. That's in New York. There's Crypto 2023, which is like a I can share all these links in the chat, but they call this this is hosted by the International Association for Cryptologic Research. So just a few potential opportunities for anyone out there who is interested in writing papers or speaking on these topics. All right. Like I said, I will share those links in chat shortly. And over to our ETH Denver recap, I suppose. So a few of us were there in person. I think it'd be fun to talk about what cool trends we witnessed, things we learned about, whether it's a different project or advancement in technologies, the overall vibe. I'd love to open the floor to that.
Well, a big thing that I noticed was account abstraction. There are a lot of projects that are actually implementing BRI-3 There are some wallet companies. Unfortunately, I can't remember the specific one I was talking to offhand, which is too bad. But account abstraction is a big thing. A lot of people are talking about it. ZK Sync launched their new ZK EVM to mainnet. Maybe not a new ZK EVM, but they launched their ZK EVM to mainnet, and they're doing some account abstraction as well. So account abstraction and then the ZK EVM wars are really, I think, the two big things from ETH Denver that I noticed. One thing that's pretty entertaining if you ever go on Twitter is watching Polygon and Scroll debate about who has the actual Ethereum compliant or Ethereum equivalent ZK EVM. So yeah, those are some of the big things that I noticed. What does everybody else think? Jack, I saw you nodding your head about the ZK EVM wars. What do you think about that stuff?
Yeah, it's funny stuff for sure. Because it's I don't know if you've seen the meme where it's like the guy who's freaking out about winning third place. It's like everyone is kind of on the same level.
Yeah.
A bunch of different. It's kind of hard to differentiate.
I've
But
seen
yeah,
the meme where it's like a bunch, the meme with all the Spider-Mans that are all pointing to each other.
Yeah,
They're all saying first ZK EVM.
yeah, exactly. So I don't know, EVM equivalents, EVM, like all the different layers of like kinds of EVM it could be is very confusing for the marketing side of it. So it's pretty easy. It's like saying best pizza in New York, honestly. It's like how do you judge that? So but yeah, I think aside that, the hackathon winner at ETH Denver this year was super interesting. It was ZKPOEX, not proof of exploit, actually, is what it is. And basically what you would do is you would do a zero knowledge proof that you could run some state transition in the EVM that would result in you stealing $100 million. And instead of like this really weird negotiation where there's like, and there's still like kind of not a lot of trust, but you can demonstrate provably to a protocol that you've exploited them and you know how to exploit them. You can start kind of talks for a completely white hat thing without ever like it's not a ransom by any means. It's like an actual way to notify them of a vulnerability. So I think that's going to be actually super huge in how we address, or at least it's another tool for us to address hacks in the future. But that was really exciting to see.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think maybe you and I were talking about that, or definitely some other people as well, about how the incentives for white hat hacking have shifted. Some people aren't paying out the bounties, and
Right.
An actual proof of exploit is a really nice thing moving forward, because you can prove that you can exploit their stuff, and then if they don't want to pay you, you can put a cone of shame on them and take their funds anyways, or maybe other people can because they know it's possible. So it's a new interesting shift in the way the market dynamics work for hacking, ethical hacking.
For sure.
I'm curious, Mark, how you got that shirt you're wearing there.
Yeah, James hooked me up with this quarter zip, I guess, fleece.
If I can't get you
Super nice.
here, I can get you other
I know.
stuff.
Yeah, this is ZK Sync's swag that they're handing out. So what better time to wear it than right now, I guess.
Yeah, and on that topic, James, how was it with the EEA being at ETH Denver? Were there lots of members there representing? And were there EEA events, new potential members, or anything?
Yeah, we were there. We had Dan Burnett, Executive Director, Charles Neville, Director of Technical Programs, and first and foremost, it's always great to hang out with the Mesh team. We have a good working relationship. It's always nice to know what's going on, hang out there. As far as some of our members, just got a list here. Amber Wallet was there. Block Damon had an event one of the days, so it was nice to see their team. C4, who you know well, Jessica with Cryptocurrency Consortium. Certic, depending on how you pronounce that, Consensus as well. Crowds, we got to hang out with them quite a bit. Ethereum Foundation, Hacken, Novez. Novez is a recent joiner of the EEA, Open Zeppelin, QuickNode, QuantStamp, Polygon, Web3 Labs, Bitwave, and Cartesi. Those are a few I just kind of have listed. So, when we go to these events, certainly we're out there kind of, listening, learning, what are people looking for, at least from a non-tech perspective. I heard a lot of the marketing needs and requests. A lot of the booths, not surprisingly, seem to be manned or womaned by marketing individuals, and a lot of those are new people. So this is kind of interesting, just conceptually. A lot of people new to the industry and curious as to what's going on. So I think whether it's people within companies here in our industry that are new, that are still trying to learn, it's interesting. And so from the EEA perspective and marketing, we want to try to get some of those folks together, and how we can kind of pull together and tell some unified messages that we need to as an industry. If I could share my screen, could I do that?
Yeah, you should be.
Okay, so here was probably the highlight of my presentation. So Keith can talk more about that. So, and actually it was my first event to go to. So it was a loud environment. And I do have to tell you, Keith, I have heard, and this is honest, sincere, I've heard a lot of feedback, not only from this, but your presentation at the Mesh event, that your speaking skills and are definitely attractive. So that is sincere. I'm not picking on you at all. Any comments, Keith?
Yeah, actually, I was gonna bring this up.
Did I beat you to it?
Yeah, you beat me to it. Yeah, everybody's like, "What's going on at ETH Denver?" And I'm like, "Well, there was this great, gaming speech, a little known entity called Appian." But I'm glad that you did. So it makes me seem. Well, I guess I already revealed my intentions, so never mind.
Yeah. And this
that's a fruit punch on my lap there.
I was going to say, I don't know. Is that an alcoholic beverage? I don't know. It's supposed to be a professional event here.
I think it was a dry.
Just a fruit punch.
This was a nice event that Sano had mentioned too. So our good friend Shadman Hussain of CGI Federal and MPA Minority Programmers Association put on a nice event where Mark spoke. So that was also top of my highlight, Mark, your part. But this was a good time, informal, but just really cool. And actually it was quite intimate. So it was kind of, just a neat atmosphere where you had your hackers there, you had some of your enterprise people, and coming together in a nice discussion way. So that was a good event. There we go. Look at that speaker there, gathering the attention.
There we go.
Yeah. So did a great job there. I won't bore you with anything else popping out. So just a good event. Pooja Ranjan, if we know her from Ethereum Cat Herders. So it was the first time I got to meet her in person. So that was great. So just a few photos just to kind of see some of the great parties. Hacking. So there's Jessica. So Charles and Jessica of C4 spoke at a Hacking event across town. Keith, you were there for that. So again, when we go to these different events, it's nice that we partner up with EEA members to either work at your booths or have joint events and just collaborate. So
I ran into a lot of. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I ran into a lot of booths, just like maybe like Matisse or fundraising, that were just like, hey, we have grants to give out, or we want to help fundraise. And I was like, for what? And they're like, really, for anything in the Web3 space. So there was like a big difference, at least in my personal experience from past events, that people were just kind of looking to give out money, right? On top of that, the one thing I'll mention I thought was really cool in the like ZK day and around was Veradice. They had a lot of really cool emerging ZK audit tools that they're running against not only ZK circuits, but also the ZK EVMs. I believe they were talking about how they're auditing the Scroll ZK EVM currently. I think they have 3 major tools. One of them is open source right now that you use called PyKiss. And then there was a nice sizable showing of Web3 games, which I kind of think is cool. That they're moving into the Web3 kind of MMO space. Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for walking us through those pictures, James. It's cooler to see it than to explain it. And it is really cool to have the EEA as a group that kind of brings people together with similar interests. They're pretty professional projects in the space and all looking to collaborate with each other. So it's always a really nice presence to have at these conferences. And also our Mesh R&D team had an event, our first Mesh R&D event, where our Enterprise ZK team represented and spoke all about Baseline to different attendees that probably haven't even heard about Baseline or may have heard of it and don't actually know where the project is at this point. But anyone who was at that event, how were those conversations? Like, Mark, if you want to kick us off, I know you were manning that area. I guess what were the conversations like where you were explaining the Baseline protocol? How did you explain it? What resonated with people?
Yeah, so I had a lot of good conversations, at least as far as I know. And it was good because it's hard for a lot of people to connect the dots between zero trust, multi-party coordination under zero knowledge. It's a big mouthful. The Baseline protocol standard is filled with requirements that can be put together to achieve it, but it's flexible. There's a lot of different ways that you can accomplish it. And really what people need is like a good visualization or sort of story that they can visualize to allow them to see what it actually looks like. So I had a lot of good conversations with people that were enterprise focused. A handful of people were specifically enterprise focused, and the regulatory pressures of sharing data compliantly and increasing the security of your system, it isn't necessarily something that is at the forefront of enterprises' minds. It certainly could be, but it isn't always at the very top of the list, right? Maybe they're thinking about making their organizations more lean, or they're thinking about just purely producing value in their business units or the software projects that they're working on. And really this Baseline protocol kind of overhauls the way that a lot of these systems interact with each other. So yeah, I don't know who's sharing this, but this is sort of the general deck that we came up with for the event that explains a lot of the different technologies that our team is researching and working with, and then sort of weaves together with the Baseline protocol that represents this new mental model and shift in how these systems can interact with each other in a secure way and do it under zero knowledge. So it was very fruitful. There's a lot of people that are interested in the concept of zero trust under zero knowledge. I connected with a handful of people that are connected with a lot of other enterprise players that could be interested in this approach, and overall made a lot of great connections. People who are familiar with ZK, very interested in the underlying cryptography of ZK and how these general zero trust patterns work. So there's a lot of people that I actually need to get back to, and I haven't had a chance to yet, but I'm excited to reach back out and pick up some of those conversations and see where they lead, especially on the enterprise side. And Keith was at the event too. He was manning the gaming station because he gave that gaming talk. But usually when people would ask questions that were very, very deep into the heavy mathematics of zero knowledge, I would just push them over in his direction. So Keith, maybe you have some some insight on the event too, from the baseline perspective.
Yeah, there was a lot more people there than I expected. There was, and oh, I will say, great
Yeah.
food as well.
Yeah.
You had, this is just an aside, but on the one like buffet table, you had like breakfast, lunch, and dinner all together, which I've never seen before, and that was great. But yeah, I wasn't expecting to talk straight for like a solid, I don't know, was it like 2 or 3 hours we were there. But I'd have people come over and they were interested in APN, and we'd be talking about APN, and then people would be coming over from the enterprise ZK baseline side, and they'd ask questions about that. So then as I'm answering like maybe ZK questions, and then another person would come up, wanting to hear about APN, but in the middle of the conversation, so they don't interrupt and they start listening, and they're like, oh, APN's got ZK? And I was like, no. I had to keep like clarifying that I'm talking, like discussing like 2 different subjects, but it was really great. Just like you said, Mark, there's a ton of people interested and looking just to connect, whether they be devs, investors. A lot of investors were reaching out just saying like, hey, we have funds we want to throw at like APN or other things. So it was pretty crazy. It's hard to tell, exactly how much people are really trying to like actually develop or actually invest or whatever it is, but it's just great to see that interest and see that they're at least willing to have those follow-up, let's talk about it, let's cooperate. A lot of companies that were also doing something similar to APN. I think the one that comes to mind was like Mirror World, and also we were talking to the Cartesi people about APN, and same for baseline as well. So overall, like a really positive experience, and also just so many lines that need following up on. It's
Yeah.
we need
a lot.
we need a James over here.
Yeah, we do. Well, yeah, it was fun. It's just a bunch of people that are interested in the real application of ZK technology. One thing that resonated particularly came out of the Blip 14, now Blip 14 work that we've been doing. A lot of times when you explain baseline, it's hard to say like, actually, how does this whole flow get synchronized? And there's a particular slide that I was showing people that showed the work that we're doing in that work group, where a VC is created and proposed and signed and then proved and then transferred and signed again, and then verified on chain, and then that state change is propagated out through the network. A lot of people saw that diagram and were able to form a very good mental connection of what baselining actually means and how it can keep systems secure, synchronized, and especially for some of the enterprise folks I was talking to, that really sparked their imagination and started making them think about what's actually possible with this zero trust and zero knowledge approach.
Yeah, APN is really nice because you can kind of with one diagram at least communicate the underlying kind of like core principles and ideas. Versus baseline is a little seemingly more complex, right? And there's not it looks like a good diagram, but I think is a little harder to explain with a single diagram. You need like at least 2 or 3 to be like, right, now you've seen it from there, and now we need to look at it from a different aspect. But I think most of the people that came through, especially questions about ZK or even APN, but especially with ZK, they were either just beginning their journey and had yet to kind of wrap their mind around, what ZK is, anything about it really, or we had people on the other extreme who were kind of self-identified and taught cryptographers who are very, aware of the scene of ZK and had in-depth questions that were usually connecting baseline enterprise ZK with other mesh teams, wondering about different elliptical curves and all kinds of, questions like that, right? I think that was my general experience, was either let's start with like Alibaba's cave, or, let's talk about what's like the future of ZK, where we're heading.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Jack was there too. What did you think of the event, Jack?
Number one, the thing that stood out to me was just how captivating Keith's talk was. Again, that was a very, very good talk, or kind of 2-minute presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, everyone was kind of like focused on it, compared to all the other ones even. But yeah, beyond that, there was a lot of really cool stuff going on. And again, like you kind of mentioned, that like interoperability between these different mesh projects. I think there was a little bit of conversation around that that I found super interesting. I think I've talked about it a couple of times before, but we're kind of interested in ZK state channels for baseline. So it was really cool to have baseline at one table, and then 15 feet away was the state channel team. And that's, again, there was the Appian thing as well, which there's a ton of possibilities for. So it was just really cool to have it all in one area and kind of see how it all kind of coagulates into something.
Yeah. So Jack, when you were around East Denver as well, were you having any conversations where baseline naturally fit in, or the premise of it?
A couple times, yeah. Especially, so we spent a lot of time with Aztec recently. Aztec Noir is super interesting, and I know that CIRCOM is kind of like the lingua franca for baseline, that and maybe NARC. But and there's actually even a NARC backend in Noir now. But yeah, kind of like as we get into, all right, why are you using Noir? There's obviously a ton of different avenues you can go, so it kind of depends on like who you're talking to, whether or not they're like interested in like I don't know, completely privacy preserving things that have nothing to do with synchronizing enterprise databases. And there's that entire realm of Web3 that's all like entirely new. And then there's also kind of how do we onboard the existing legacy Web2 type infrastructure, and that's generally where baseline comes into the conversation. So kind of when people are wondering how does this actually like fit into anything like real, and again, I don't want to discount all of the like really cool solutions like semaphores and TLS notary, but for things that like normal people are going to tangibly understand, I think that it's not like they totally understood it, but there was definitely something compelling about not like having to put everything on a blockchain, just like these proofs that kind of let you signal off chain exactly what you're doing. That kind of resonated with people. So.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. All
Yeah.
right. So that will wrap up our Denver updates. Andreas, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, it's like, has there anything that is already connecting like Polygon ID that utilizes like identity as under zero knowledge with DITs and VCs with other protocols like ZK protocols, like integrating it with like ZK Sync or Aztec or so forth, because that's really the key, right? Because a stack, even if it's fully privacy preserving, if I don't have the zero trust with zero knowledge control going in for authentication and authorization, then that's an issue, right? I'm breaking the both the zero trust and the zero knowledge chain at that point, right? So actually, so it's like so that's question number one. Question number two: was there anything that people talked about, like in connection zero knowledge versus compliance, and that inherent tension in there? Was there no talk about compliance at all?
So I could speak to question one. I was actually at the Polygon event, and that was where they announced their on-chain ZK querying of VCs. So I haven't seen any material about people actually integrating with it or incorporating it because they announced it there. And I don't know if I heard anything specific about regulatory compliance. I checked out a lot of booths and didn't really see much. I don't know if Keith, you or Jack saw anything about that point.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go ahead and go through each question real quick too. I can at least attest to the first one that I know some events I was at, maybe especially the Tachyon one, that the number of people I talked to, there was like a significant amount of them that I cannot remember exactly what their project was, but they were like, I just remember the sentence, but we're integrating Polygon ID or something on it. So enough that it was noticeable in my mind. You'd be like, okay, I can attest that it is around and being used. And for the second one, I feel like I haven't heard quite yet the topic of, while I was there, of like, oh, well, this is, these are the regulations and you must comply, but that generally that's where they were heading towards, right? I talked about earlier Veradice, and there's just this kind of like uproar of all these security auditing tools specifically for ZK that I think is like a natural lead in possibly to that area of what you're talking about, but not quite at that level of progression yet, Andreas. So, my experience though.
Interesting.
Yeah. It seems like a topic that not a lot of people really want to like broach really. It definitely was kind of muted in my experience. I would say this wasn't explicitly at ETH Denver, but with respect to regulatory compliance, the most interesting thing around ZK that happened would be the privacy pools release that did happen at ETH Denver, I think, like at the same time. Maybe it was actually presented at ETH Denver. So that's like Tornado Cash with proof of innocence. It took me a while to kind of figure out what the difference between proof of innocence and proof of compliance is, but it seems like most of the public chatter around it is not necessarily around compliance, but around just not being guilty per se.
That's odd. Was like not being guilty. It's like I don't prove compliance, but I'm not guilty, right? It's like, what?
It's very weird. Again, I struggled to figure out exactly.
That's odd. So there's like, it's like, I mean, the basic problem is you need KYC, and someone needs to attest to that, and that needs to be presented, because otherwise someone out there is going to fry your ass, right? Eventually,
so I think
and you need to prove where your funds are coming from, right? It's like, and there's like, and the hammer is coming down, and not only in the US. It's like Europe just enacted in October new digital asset regulatory framework, right? The Swiss are coming down. I think the only one that is not like tightening up is funny enough Hong Kong. But otherwise Singapore is like tightening. Korea, the Chinese shoot you in the head right away. The Indians like throw you in the Ganges, so which is equivalent to being is equivalent to that. So it's like it's just a matter of time. So it's like what really surprises me that people are not being more proactive about that.
Yeah, and just really quickly, I think the difference between innocence and compliance, like you said, there's KYC AML, and then the provenance of the funds. Proof of innocence makes no attempt to KYC AML. It's just these funds are not like, you use exclusion lists essentially to say that certain addresses can't join my privacy pool. So you can like make sure that you don't have North Korean funds pooled with your funds, but so it's innocent in the sense that you didn't like, and it's reactive. It doesn't actually really work, but that I think that's the idea, is like, instead of proving that you are KYC AML, you're just trying to demonstrate that you aren't part of a fund pool that is shielding stolen or illegal money.
Oh, so you're proving that you're not a hacker. The funds do not come from a from a hacker address.
Right.
It's like, so I it's like, so I push it into ZK Sync, and then or not ZK Sync, at stack, and then in and out, and I'm done, right? Or I bridge the shit over to Monero and then bridge it back. It's like, oops, like it's like what it's like that. There's like, that's what totally gets me. It's like no, it's and no one is going to say, oh, it's not coming from an address. It's like, yeah, prove it. Where did that balance come from? Where the balance before that come from, right? So that's the challenge, which in the real world is taken care of by the fact that the money is coming from banks, and every bank is applying KYC AML controls, at least supposedly so.
Well, and I know we're in General Assembly, but yeah, Jack, I mean, in what you experienced, did they address this at all? Was it just like, oh, here's a blacklist, whitelist situation? Or do they even talk about plans to address like how they are accomplishing this proof of innocence with these obvious faults and flaws, or what?
Yeah, so again, this is Amin, who is kind of leading this. It's fairly well known in Web3. So and obviously he's very much coming from a cypherpunk attitude. So I think that it's by no means being done to comply. It's being done to do like the bare minimum of what the current like issues with Tornado Cash was. I would say like, it seems like most of the people who are like actively working on like full-blown KYC, it kind of seems like it's happening in the dark, because I have kind of like looked around for it a little bit. I've really struggled to kind of see those conversations, but it's obviously happening.
All right. Thanks for the conversation. I think what we'll do for the final segment, and then we'll see if there's time for an open floor, is shift into the BRI-3, the baseline reference implementation number 3, milestone number 3 completion and walkthrough. So I'll hand over to that work group. Keith, I think you're leading us here.
Yes, I believe that is correct. But of course, anybody else who's part of the group, or anybody who's not or involved, feel free to jump in or ask questions along the way. I am going to share my screen. All right, can you guys see?
Yep, you're good.
All right, so just kind of on my screen here, you should be able to see the milestone 3 kind of description acceptance criteria. We have just finished milestone 3. If you kind of take a gander through the description here, we can see that it describes that BRI-3 should support BPI subjects, subject accounts, BPI accounts, of course, as described to the standard. And then these identities can perform actions like joining work groups. They can be properly authenticated with proof of ownership, and they also can perform messaging between them. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to take a look at the kind of closed pull requests that have kind of led up to the finishing of milestone 3 in BRI-3 SRI. So we see here, there's actually a lot of work that has been done earlier with work group setup, archiving work groups, kind of migrations, and then we get into the last kind of stretch of work that focused mostly on messaging, which was primarily implemented by Ogden, and then also we have authentication and authorization, which was primarily implemented by Stefan. So just to kind of go over a couple of them really quick, I guess we can really start at the top and work our way backwards. We have the addition of a doc describing current encryption. This was for messaging encryption, which if we have time, we'll get to a little bit in the code review. Right now, the messages are just encrypted at rest for milestone 3, and that will be expanded upon later. We also have another, archive work group. This is addition of archiving the work group functionality added to the current work group, set of functionalities. Message encryption. So this goes along the functionality along with the doc for describing how encryption is accomplished. NAT is being used as the messaging mechanism within the BPI currently. Here we have auth and authorization. NAT's auth and authorization, which takes us to kind of the large part of authorization and auth that was implemented by Stefan. We have a Castle Prisma call here, or PR here, as well as implementation of we see ability decorators. So we can kind of see here. When you take these lists of PRs and put them together, you can tell that we're breaking down, by very specific functionality, right? Trying to make these PRs more succinct, concise, easier for everybody to kind of review and not have to spend your whole life trying to understand, everything that's going on in multiple parts of the code. Because as the code base gets bigger, this becomes more difficult. So, for example, if we dive into something like the abilities decorator, we have a very small amount of commits, files changed, and we can see, pretty easily where those changes were made in the Nest.js, adding in to the authorization module, adding in the actual authorization decorator itself, adding into the authorization guard, how this is kind of accomplished, authorization through a decorator on a route, and so on and so forth. So of course you're encouraged, if you want to get involved, go on and read through this, especially if you are a developer, engineer, code oriented. It's a nice intro to see how you would build out, for example, a BPI, as well as other, large complex systems that desire authentication, authorization, messaging, so on and so forth. So before I leave this area, because I know time is really limited and the PRs, do we have any questions from anybody? Based on how the group does this, how we accomplish this, or the functionality so far. No, sounds like a resounding no from anybody. James, no, not you. I thought you'd have some questions for me for sure.
No, you're doing good so far.
Thanks. So we'll move into the code now. As I've mentioned, Ogden and Stefan, their areas for milestone 3 are the last 2 that are accomplished through authentication, authorization, and messaging. So I'm not as familiar with this part of the code base as they are, right? But if we go ahead and take a look, everything will seem as familiar as you would expect it if you've looked at the previous code reviews that we've done. Where we have under BRI, we've kind of separated.
We're still looking at your GitHub here.
Oh, are you? Okay. Let me stop share and reshare them. Appreciate that. How about now? What do you see?
Yeah, you're good. Your VS Code.
Okay, so we have under our, we do have a front end that is added in for simple authentication purposes, right? That as long as if you were to spin this up and set up the database and run the Prisma seed commands for the database and the migration and everything that are all in the README, as long as you seed it or add your public address of whatever EOA you're using, let's say MetaMask, and then you'll be able to run the front end And if you log in, it'll spit out a JWT that you can use to make all these postman calls to the BPI currently, because it's protected by authentication. Every route is protected by the authentication, except for, of course, the login. And so if you notice in the structure here, everything is separated as previously seen in other videos, where we have the identity, say identity, for example, includes BPI accounts, BPI subject accounts, BPI subjects. We've seen things like that, and work group as well, which will have a folder for workflows, work groups, work steps. Primarily at the end of milestone 3, we worked on communication, which is set up a lot like the other modules, and as well as authorization, which is a little bit different than the other modules, but closer to authentication. Communication here, we can see we have the agent itself, just like most other agents that exist within the Nest.js architecture of this reference implementation. We have the injectable BPI messaging agent, which of course has access to the storage agent, the message storage agent, as well as the subject storage agent, and of course logging in this case. And as you would expect if you followed some of the previous videos, in the message agent, we have all these kind of validation that's being done. If you look at some of the function names here, throw if BPI message ID exists. So these you can imagine as if you are doing some activity that will allow you or kind of by proxy sends a BPI message through the NAT server. One of the things that it's going to do is going to check if the BPI message ID that's being used in the new message, if it exists already. And it's kind of obvious, well, if the BPI message ID already exists, then something is wrong and we need to throw an error. So things like that. And we can look through the logic and say, okay, well, I'm going to wait for the storage agent. The storage agent is going to take the message ID, and we're going to try to retrieve from the storage that ID, or that message by its ID, which really means to say, well, if I can retrieve that thing, if I get something back, then that message ID already exists, right? A message exists already with that ID. So something is wrong because I'm trying to create another message with the same ID, right? So we have a lot of validation on this level, and you can see, okay, well, if that message ID does exist, meaning something is wrong, right? One already exists, I'm trying to create a new one with the same ID, we need to throw some kind of, exception here, right? So to throw an exception to say like, oh, we need to tell the system or whoever's running the system that this is bad, something has gone on. And those kind of go on with, just depending on our needs within the messaging system. Storage agent, we've already seen it a little bit of, but this is just to be able to access where the messages are being stored. So as we saw in the message agent, where it was telling the storage system, hey, pull back that message by ID to check if it exists. This is the logic it's using to pull that message back by ID. This is kind of the bridge between, where things exist running kind of in an ephemeral manner in the BPI and in the system, and the database. Let's say, for example, we're using Postgres right now in a first version, but whatever database you're using, if you're making your own. And this is the connection using Prisma, just an object relational mapper, right? So if we go to search by get message ID, this is obvious. We're going to find, let's await this message, find unique, and this is kind of handled by Prisma itself. Translates this into a query into the database, saying where ID, the ID is the ID that we've passed it, and it includes. We want to include these topics from whatever query is returned, right? We of course have the spec. This is just the kind of the unit test for the agent itself to make sure that the agent's functions are working properly. And then so this differs from the actual messaging agent, right? These BPI message agents are kind of what you're used to seeing in the other modules here, right? This is how we deal with a work group, we deal with a message in the same way. But there's another layer to messaging, which is the actual NAT server itself and running NAT, right? So this will look kind of a little bit different than what we're used to in looking at another agent. But if we do take a little glimpse here, we can see we have things like, oh, we need to publish a message, and on message received, we're going to do something, and kind of so on and so forth, right? So the way that is set up now, and anybody can feel free to interrupt in case I get this wrong. I believe we agreed that everything will be like a publication and subscribe type interface within the BPI, that if somebody's publishing a message, that anybody with a particular type of authorization should be able to subscribe and receive those messages. And I think that's a good kind of first step introduction to how the messaging agent, aside from the BPI messages, work, right? This is a NAT server that's gonna be spun up separate to the database, separate to the front end, separate to running Nest.js, that is handling message that are being published and then receiving those messages by subscribing to that kind of topic in publication, right? And then we have, of course, the mock BPI message storage agent. This is for testing purposes. Whenever we run some of these larger tests that require reaching out to the database. In this case, when the test is run, it doesn't require the database and everything to be spun up. It can just simply focus on what are we trying to test, and what that requires is that we set up kind of like a mock storage that's, again, in like ephemeral memory. So whenever the test runs, this will spin up and say, okay, well, what are all the things I need in this like ephemeral database to run these tests for now, so that we don't have to spin up a database every single time and run it and make sure all the data is in there currently. And then all the other things you would expect inside of this module, the DTOs for the request and response, for creating a message. This is the information you need to create a message: ID, from, to, content, signature, type, to update a message. The response DTO as well. We know what constructs a response: the ID, from subject to BPI subject, content, signature, type. Possible errors that you can run into now in the current system. And then the message controller. This is kind of on the high level if a route that needs to, you can send a request to, and that could be hit by a subject, by an external subject, get BPI message by ID, create BPI message, update BPI message. So this is, you can imagine, as that kind of connection between the outside world of this BPI, and you're on the outside and you need to interact with this thing. These are the routes that I'm going to send a request because I need to create a BPI message, right? I need to just retrieve a BPI message. This controller kind of tells us what to do whenever, let's say, if you want to create a BPI message, it's going to, do a couple of decorator things up top that are a little fancy, but in essence, it's going to execute a command. It's going to await an execute of a create BPI message command. And if we go into that command, we will be able to see, how is that done, right? This is the command handler. So the command itself is just another structure. Well, the command is composed, again, of ID, from, to, content, signature, type. And this is how that is handled whenever we decide to create one. Well, first, we're going to fetch the BPI subject, make sure it exists. If not, throw some kind of error, and then do the same thing. But in this case, we're going to do for the to subject. We're going to authorize, we're going to actually create the message that now that these three things are true and they have passed, and then we'll store the message, so on and so forth. And feel free to go in here and, look through, it's open source, look through all the different things aside from create. I'm not going to go through each one: delete, get, so on and so forth, process an inbound message. As some of these are more related to how NATS deals with things, and update BPI message. With a couple minutes left, I'll show a little bit of the authorization that Skos or Stefan has implemented. So, in addition to authentication, which is guarding all routes, to say you need to have that particular JWT that corresponds to like a public key inside of the database. We have authorization. So now we have these different types of kind of groups that you can belong to. that say, are you authorized to do something or not, right? Are you an internal BPI subject, right? So you can manage, in this case, like all, right? But all doesn't necessarily mean like every single piece of functionality, right? It's kind of like the default here. If you're an external BPI subject and you have you're within, like, you're a work group admin, for example, administrator, so you're able to read work group, update work group, delete work group, so on and so forth, right? And so this kind of gives us a granularity in addition to it. You've been authenticated, you are able to act in the system. Now it's beyond that. Are you authorized? What are you authorized to do in the system, right? Are you an admin of a work group? Are you part of a workflow? Are you acting in a work step? Are you the owner of a BPA subject account? So all this granularity to say, if you have this role, then you are allowed to do this particular thing within this particular module. You're allowed to take this action. That before, all the routes were open. Everybody could do this to the work group, right? That's how it starts. And then now that we add this, only certain people are allowed to do certain things in the system, which, as you can imagine, is extremely necessary, right? And that's it. That's all, folks. I wish I had more time to talk. If you have questions, please reach out to the team. Join the Slack chat, clone down the repo, follow the READMEs. Should be able to spin it up yourself. If you have any problems, reach out to us. We will respond. We're willing, I think, to get on the call. There's been plenty of people that we have private chats with them that are working through the system. Just don't hesitate and don't be shy, right? And thank you very much.
Awesome.
Oh, milestone 4. Milestone 4 comes next, which is the zero knowledge, proving on-chain everything blockchain compatible parts. So look forward to that.
Cool. Thank you so much, Keith. And thank you to our BRI-3 working group. If you had more you wanted to show us, then join us on the show next week and take us through whatever else. But since we are at the end of the hour, I'll wrap up our General Assembly for this month. And we'll carry on with our baseline show next week. But that's a huge milestone. Thank you for walking us through that. And as you mentioned, join our chats to ask more questions or learn more about the work. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you very much, Keith. Thank you, everybody else.
Yeah, big thank you to BRI-3 work group.
Yeah,
Yo,
BRI-3 guys, awesome job.
Yeah, Shri, Stepan, Kostic, Ognan, Gurtik. I think that's how you say his name.
Yep.
Am I missing anybody else?
Nope. Great job, guys.
Thank you.
Manique has done some work.
Manique.
Yeah. Thank you, James.
Thank you, James.
All
for showing
right.
off the cool.
Cheers, guys.
Yep. Have a great
I'm
week.
on.
Is it time to get weird now? Are we still live?
That's right.
We
We're
get
still
weird?
live. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, James, let's get weird.
Can I get weird now?
Show after the show, James. What else do you have to say?
Yeah.
What else do I have to say? Nothing. I did want to give a shout out that you weren't there, but I didn't want to shine a light that you weren't in Denver. Yo,
Let's do
so
it. This is like the end of Hot
It's too
Ones,
late. You
right?
did it.
yeah.
You get one chance to plug something, right?
It's not being.
What do you want to plug? Yoav not being at ETH Denver.
All righty. This is where I'm going to cut it off. Thank you, everybody.
Yoav wasn't there, everybody.